This is Alan Seaborn from Winning at Home. Welcome to a recorded from home edition of In Progress, a podcast about faith, life, and how we grow. And like all my recent episodes have been, I'm recording this on my phone. I think you probably just heard my email ding in the background, and I got my dogs here in the room too, so the audio quality and the background noise is going to be what it's been lately, and I know that's just kind of part of the deal these days, right? But there is a passage from Ephesians chapter 3 that I wanted to share, and that I think is, obviously we're in this really unique time. I know that not all states continue to be under the stay-at-home order, and in Michigan we have some businesses that are allowed to start operating a little bit more at a time, and we'll continue to, I think, kind of phase into that as we move forward. But obviously life is still deeply impacted, and we're still all feeling huge effects as a result of, just being really limited in our physical interactions with people. Just yesterday, Annalise was talking about how badly and deeply she really misses hugging people. And those are the kind of, almost small, minor details that feel like they kind of get lost in the midst of everything else that we're adjusting to and we're figuring out along the way. And as we're in this new normal, as we're figuring out what life looks like right now, and even as we transition into being back at work or being back in more normal settings, there's going to be a lot of transition coming ahead. And as we're in the midst of that, there's a passage, like I said, from Ephesians chapter 3 that I want to share. Ephesians 3 it starts off with Paul sharing some of his story. He doesn't really get a ton into the detail, but he shares the broad strokes, and he reminds the Ephesians that he was called, that he was uniquely met by God and sent to let Gentiles, non-Jewish people, know that who had been assumed to be exclusively, kind of up to that point, the Jewish Messiah, Jesus, was actually Messiah for all people. And Paul, he talks about how God had chosen him to be the one to really get this message out to as many Gentiles as he could. And that's what he spent his life in pursuit of after his call. And he says in Ephesians chapter 3, I'm going to read verses 14 through 19. He says, "For this reason I kneel before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name. I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power, together with all the Lord's holy people, to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God." And maybe immediately when you hear that and you follow along with those words as I read them, maybe you go, okay, I don't really see how this directly applies to the coronavirus global pandemic and all the changes that we're living through right now. And really what I would say is, as I read through that passage in preparation for this, I just kept thinking, wow, it's really easy in the middle of stuff, in the middle of uncertainty, in the middle of difficulty, in the middle of sacrifice, in the middle of loss and grief and all the things that we're experiencing right now. It's just really easy to forget some of these truths, some of these things that before this all started, we would have said, oh, obviously, I know a lot about how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ. But when we're in the middle of stuff, it becomes easy. I don't know if the right word to describe it fully is to question that, but maybe that's, for some of us, maybe that's the right word, to question, well, where's God's love showing up right now? But I think for others of us, it's not that we question it. It's just that we sort of lose sight of it because there's so much else going on and there's so much competing for our attention, which doesn't seem like that would be the case right now. But it kind of is the experience, it feels like. And as new information and updated information, and then people arguing about the information, as all of that can just so easily consume what we're thinking about, that we can just easily forget about how God's love for us is just unreal. It's just on another level. And before Paul says that, how wide and long and high and deep, describing the love of Christ, he says in verse 16, I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being. And I want to encourage all of us. I think it was 2 weeks ago now. My dad shared we did a Zoom call for our Winning at Home staff devotions. And he said, okay, at the end of this time, I want to be able to measure, to look at and see noticeable growth in the depth of my relationship with God. I want to be able to look and see notable growth in the depth of my relationship with my spouse and my family. I want to look and see notable growth in me living into my purpose. And when he shared that, I think it really resonated with a lot of us on that call, because it's been easy to just kind of float along and go, okay, we're ticking off the days and we're going to get back to being able to go to work and we're going to get back to a little bit more normal. And, when we can get back to the routine and resume regular stuff again, and kind of forget, hey, right now we have an opportunity to really let this truth of how wide and long and high and deep Christ's love is for us, and we have this ability to connect in with God, and to, as Paul says, this little line here was the line that really jumped out at me and encouraged me and made me want to share this. And now I'm looking at my computer and I lost where I am here. Verse 16, I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being. And it feels kind of like, hey, I've talked about finding peace in the middle of tough circumstances. I've talked about, where are we putting our trust? Are we putting it in stuff, in our 401k, in our job being there for us, in being able to get stuff that we need at the grocery store? Or are we being strengthened inside by what God's up to in our lives? By him bringing that peace the power through His Spirit in our inner being. And I want to encourage you, if you've been kind of just, okay, yep, we're checking off today, checking off tomorrow, checking off the next day, and eventually we're going to head back to normal again. I want to encourage you to take a look, take inventory, take stock, whatever makes sense in your head, to pay attention to some of the things that you've been doing over the past few weeks, and to say, has there been intentional growth? Has there been intentional investment in my relationships with my spouse and my kids? Has there been just kind of floating along? Or have I been allowing God to, despite circumstances, speak into my life, despite circumstances, give me guidance and direction, and despite circumstances, strengthen me by being at work through His Holy Spirit in my life? And I want to encourage you, if the answer to any of those is, yeah, I've been focused more on the circumstances, and when those are fixed, then I can start working on this other stuff. That's easy, that's natural, that's normal. But I want to encourage you, and I want to challenge myself as well, to not let that be our response, to not just kind of float along, but to be intentional during this time, and to allow, but also to seek for God to be at work in our lives in the midst of this. Because He's ready, He's willing, He's waiting. And I want to encourage you, and I want to practice inviting Him in and allowing Him to be at work in the midst, no matter what the circumstances are, to let Him be at work in our lives.